The envelope lay on my kitchen counter, taunting me. Fourth one this month. Same desperate handwriting, same desperate plea. I took a sip of my morning coffee and stared at it, already knowing what was inside without having to open it. My name is Olivia Reed, and I made the fatal mistake of becoming successful in a family that views prosperity as a communal resource. With a slow exhale, I picked up the envelope and tore it open. A handwritten note fell onto the counter, alongside a folded stack of papers, medical bills, marked in harsh red ink. Olivia, as you can see, your father's condition has worsened. The specialist appointment is next week, and we're still short $3,000. You're the only one who can help us. Please don't turn your back on family again. Love, Mom. I set the note down, my stomach clenching with a familiar mixture of guilt and resentment. $3,000. It wasn't about the money, it was never just about the money. It was about everything else that came with it, the expectations, the judgment, the never-ending cycle of need. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Mom's smiling face lit up my screen. Perfect timing, as always. I let it ring, watching until the screen went dark again. Within seconds, a text message appeared. I know you're there, Olivia. We need to talk about Dad's treatment. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to steady my breathing. Every interaction was the same, the initial plea, my hesitation, their escalation, and eventually, my capitulation. For years of this cycle since I'd started my business. For years of watching my hard-earned success become a family ATM. Not this time. I typed back a response I'd never had the courage to send before. I can't do this anymore. I've helped with the last 3 rounds of treatments. I've paid off the mortgage. I've covered Ryan's college tuition. There has to be a line somewhere, and I'm drawing it here. I'm sorry about Dad, but I can't be the family's financial safety net anymore. I hit send before I could change my mind, then immediately turned my phone off. The silence that followed felt both liberating and terrifying. For the first time in years, I'd said no. Little did I know that my family had a very different understanding of the word no, and they were about to show me exactly what happened when I dared to use it. The week that followed my text was blissfully quiet. No calls, no texts, no guilt-ridden emails. I threw myself into work, finalizing the details for the biggest contract my design firm had ever secured. Everything was falling into place professionally, even as my personal life remained suspended in an anxious quiet. You look like you've seen a ghost, remarked Zoe, my business partner and closest friend, as she dropped a stack of fabric samples on my desk. Still no word from the family? I shook my head, clicking through the client's feedback on our latest designs. Nothing. And honestly, it's making me more nervous than if they'd blown up my phone. Zoe perched on the edge of my desk, her dark eyes studying my face. Maybe they finally got the message? You've been supporting them for years, Liv. It's about time they figured out how to stand on their own feet. You don't know my family, I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. They don't just get messages. There's always a response, always a consequence. I gestured to the stack of samples. Anyway, what did the Hendersons think of the color palette? Zoe allowed the subject change, diving into the client's feedback, but I could feel her concern lingering. The truth was, I'd rarely talked about my family situation, even with Zoe. The complicated web of obligation, responsibility, and guilt wasn't something easily explained to someone who came from a normal, functional family. By Friday afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, they had accepted my decision. Maybe my brother Ryan had stepped up, Maybe they'd found another solution. Maybe they'd finally realized I couldn't be their perpetual safety net. I was locking up the office when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi Olivia, this is Nurse Jenkins from Lakeside Memorial. Your father has been admitted and is asking for you. Please come as soon as possible." My heart dropped. Dad was in the hospital. Had something happened because I'd refused to help? Was this my fault? I was in my car and halfway to the hospital before rationality began to creep back in. Why would a nurse text rather than call? Why hadn't my mother or brother contacted me? And why from an unknown number? I pulled into a parking space and dialed the hospital's main number with shaking hands. "Lakeside Memorial, how may I direct your call?" "Hi, this is Olivia Reed. I just received a message that my father, William Reed, was admitted. Could you confirm this for me, please?" A pause, and the clicking of keys. "I'm sorry, Ms. Reed, but we don't have any patient by that name currently admitted." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Are you sure?" I received a text from a Nurse Jenkins saying he was asking for me. Another pause, longer this time. "We don't have a Nurse Jenkins on staff, Ms. Reed." Ice flooded my veins as realization dawned. It had been a trick. A cruel manipulation to get me to the hospital, where I assumed my family would be waiting, ready to confront me about my refusal to help. As I put the car in reverse, my phone lit up with an incoming call, this time from Ryan. With a shaking hand, I answered. "What the hell was that, Ryan? A fake text about Dad being in the hospital? Have you all lost your minds?" There was a pause, then my brother's voice came through, unnervingly calm. "So you didn't go in? That's a shame. We're all here, Liv. Mom, Dad, Aunt Karen, Uncle Jim. We were hoping to have a family discussion about your recent decisions. You staged a family intervention because I wouldn't give you more money?" My voice rose in disbelief. "Do you have any idea how sick that is?" "What's sick is abandoning your family when they need you most," Ryan shot back. "Dad's specialist appointment is on Monday, Olivia. The money has to be paid up front. What do you expect us to do?" "I expect you to figure it out like adults instead of manipulating me." I was nearly shouting now, my hands trembling with anger. "I've done nothing but help for years, and the one time I say no." "The one time?" Ryan's laugh was harsh. "That's rich, Liv. You've been pulling away ever since you started making real money. The big house, the fancy car, the European vacations. Meanwhile, Dad's dying and you can't spare a few $1,000s? That's not fair, and you know it. I've given over $100,000 to this family in the past 4 years. There has to be a limit somewhere. Blood doesn't have limits, Olivia." His voice hardened. "You'll regret this. Family remembers who stands by them and who doesn't." Before I could respond, he hung up. I sat in the hospital parking lot, trying to process what had just happened. The fake emergency. The ambush they'd planned. The threat in Ryan's voice. It was a level of manipulation I hadn't thought them capable of, which made me wonder, what else might they do? As I drove home, a hollowness spread through my chest. I'd always known there was a cost to success in my family, but I'd never imagined it would be this steep. The following morning dawned with an ominous quiet. No new messages, no calls, just the weight of Ryan's threat hanging in the air. I busied myself with work, spreading design boards across my dining room table as I finalized the presentation for Monday's client meeting. A sharp knock at my front door jolted me from my concentration. Through the peephole, I saw my mother's familiar figure, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I hesitated, torn between ignoring her and facing whatever storm she'd brought to my doorstep. With a deep breath, I opened the door. "Mom." "Save it," she cut me off, pushing past me into the entryway. Her eyes darted around my living room, taking in the high ceilings, the carefully chosen furniture, the art on the walls. "Nice to see where your priorities lie." I closed the door, steeling myself. "If you've come to continue what Ryan started yesterday, you can leave now." "I'm not changing my mind." She turned to face me, and I was struck by how tired she looked. The lines around her mouth had deepened since I'd last seen her, and there was a new heaviness to her movements. "Do you know what it's like?" she asked, her voice quieter than I'd expected. "Watching your husband suffer and knowing there's a treatment that could help, but you can't afford it? While your own daughter lives like this?" She gestured to my home. "Mom, I've helped with 3 rounds of treatment already. I've given everything I can." "Everything you can?" She scoffed. "Look around you, Olivia. You could sell one of those fancy paintings and cover your father's treatment twice over." "That's not how this works," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "My business is successful because I've invested in it. This house, my car, my lifestyle, they're all part of the image my clients expect. I can't just liquidate my life every time the family has a financial crisis." "Your image," she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your father is dying, and you're worried about your image." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears of frustration. "Mom, please. Try to understand. I love Dad. I love all of you. But this cycle has to stop. You and Ryan need to figure out how to manage without me constantly bailing everyone out." Something shifted in her expression then, a hardening, a decision being made. "Well, I came here hoping you'd changed your mind. I see I was wrong." She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with an unsettling smile. "You know, your father and I always taught you to share with your brother. It seems we failed in that lesson." With that cryptic remark, she left. I stood in my entryway, a sense of dread settling over me. There had been something in her voice, something in that smile, that felt like a warning. My mother had never been one to accept defeat gracefully, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That evening, as I was preparing for bed, my phone chimed with a text from Ryan. "You should check your company's social media accounts." My stomach dropped as I rushed to my laptop, pulling up the Instagram page for Reed Design Group. What I saw made my blood run cold. Someone had posted dozens of pictures of my personal life, vacations, my home, my car, alongside screenshots of my father's medical bills and statements about family abandonment and selfish success. The captions painted me as a heartless daughter who lived in luxury while her father suffered. The comments section was already filling with outrage. Clients were posting about reconsidering their contracts. Colleagues were expressing shock and disappointment. With shaking hands, I tried to delete the posts, only to discover I'd been locked out of the account. Somehow, they'd gained access and changed the passwords. I grabbed my phone and called our IT specialist, explaining the situation in a voice that sounded far calmer than I felt. Then I called Zoe, who answered on the first ring. "I just saw it," she said before I could speak. "What the hell, Liv? Is this your family's doing?" "Yes," I managed, my voice breaking. They're trying to pressure me. They want money for my dad's treatment, and when I said no, I couldn't finish the sentence. Jesus." Zoe exhaled sharply. Okay, don't panic. We'll fix this. I've already reported the account as hacked, and I'm calling everyone on our client list first thing tomorrow to explain the situation. The Henderson meeting is on Monday, I said numbly. If they see this, I'll handle it, Zoe assured me. This isn't your fault, Liv. What your family is doing, it's not just manipulative, it's potentially illegal. Have you considered getting a lawyer involved? The thought hadn't even occurred to me. These were my parents, my brother, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. How had we reached a point where legal action was on the table? Let's see if we can contain the damage first, I said, rubbing my temples. If they don't back down, then, maybe. After hanging up, I sat in the dark, staring at my computer screen as notifications continued to pour in. My professional reputation, something I'd spent years building, was being systematically dismantled by the people who should have been my biggest supporters. My phone buzzed again. Ryan. Ready to reconsider? $3,000 is a small price to pay to make this go away. I read the message twice, disbelief giving way to a cold, clarifying anger. They were blackmailing me, using my professional reputation as leverage. This wasn't about Dad's treatment anymore, it was about control, about punishing me for daring to set a boundary. With steady hands, I typed a response. What you're doing is extortion, Ryan. You have until midnight to remove those posts and return access to our accounts, or I'm going to the police. This isn't a negotiation. His reply came almost immediately. You'd really call the cops on your own family? Over money? Wow, Liv. Just wow. I didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything, screenshots of the hacked accounts, copies of the threatening texts, records of all the financial assistance I'd provided over the years. If this was war, I needed to be prepared. By morning, the posts were still up, and my access was still blocked. My inbox was flooded with messages from concerned clients and colleagues, and 3 meetings had been cancelled. With a heavy heart but resolute determination, I called the police. The officer who took my report was sympathetic but not particularly optimistic. Family disputes are complicated, she explained, reviewing the evidence I'd provided. Especially when they involve finances. However, the unauthorized access to your business accounts is a clearer issue. We'll look into it, but I recommend securing a restraining order as well. A restraining order. Against my own family. The suggestion was so surreal I almost laughed. Is that really necessary? I asked. The officer's expression softened. Ms. Reed, based on what you've shown me, your family's behavior is escalating. They've moved from emotional manipulation to actions that could seriously damage your livelihood. It's better to be cautious. I left the station with instructions for filing a restraining order and a growing sense that I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. My family had pushed me to this point, but taking legal action against them still felt like a betrayal of everything I'd been raised to believe about family loyalty. As I drove home, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be the police with an update, I answered. Hello? Olivia Reed? A woman's crisp, professional voice came through the speaker. Yes, speaking. This is Catherine Winters from the Henderson Group. I'm calling regarding our meeting scheduled for Monday. My heart sank. The Hendersons, our biggest potential clients. The account that could take Reed Design Group to the next level. Ms. Winters, I was planning to call you today. There's been a situation with our social media. Yes, We've seen the posts, she interrupted, her tone neutral. It's quite concerning, especially given the nature of our project. I understand your concern, I said, struggling to maintain my professional composure. But I can assure you that our company's accounts were hacked. This is a personal matter that's being handled. Ms. Reed, she cut in again, the Henderson Group values family above all else. It's one of our core principles. If what those posts suggest is true, that you would prioritize business success over caring for an ailing parent, well, that doesn't align with our values. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting back a wave of helpless anger. My family's manipulation was working exactly as they'd intended. Ms. Winters, with all due respect, those posts present a deliberately misleading picture. I've supported my family extensively over the years, but there comes a point where we've decided to postpone our meeting, she said, her voice cooling further. Until this matter is resolved, we'll be exploring other options for our design needs. The call ended before I could respond, leaving me sitting in my car, shaking with a mixture of rage and despair. The Henderson account represented nearly a third of our projected revenue for the next year. Without it, we'd have to scale back, possibly even let some of our newer staff go. All because I'd finally said no. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Heard about the Hendersons. Tough break. But hey, at least you still have your principles, right? Something snapped inside me then. A lifetime of giving in, of putting family first at my own expense, of walking on eggshells to keep the peace, it all crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. This would never end. Not with one more payment, not with one more sacrifice. My family had shown their true colors, and they would bleed me dry if I let them. It was time to end this cycle once and for all. I called Zoe. They got to the Hendersons, I said without preamble. They're postponing the meeting, maybe pulling out entirely. Shit, she breathed. What do you want to do? I want to fight back, I said, a new strength in my voice. Not just contain the damage, actively fight back. I'm tired of being the victim in this story. There was a pause, then Zoe's voice came through, filled with fierce loyalty. Just tell me what you need. The plan came together over the weekend, a counteroffensive that would either salvage my professional reputation or burn my family bridges forever. There would be no middle ground, no compromise. I was all in. Step 1 was regaining control of our company accounts. Our IT specialist worked through the night, eventually tracing the hack to Ryan's IP address and restoring our access. By Sunday morning, the damaging posts had been removed, but the damage to our reputation remained. Step 2 was addressing that damage head-on. I drafted a personal statement explaining the situation, a measured, professional response that acknowledged the posts without diving into the messy family details. Zoe helped me strike the right tone, and we posted it to all our platforms. But step 3 was the hardest and the most necessary. With trembling hands, I texted my entire family. There will be a family meeting at my house tonight at 7 p.m. Everyone needs to be there. This ends today. The responses ranged from outraged to smug, but they all confirmed they would come. They probably thought I was capitulating, finally giving in to their pressure. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. At precisely 6:55 p.m., I stood in my living room, watching through the window as they arrived. Mom and Dad in their aging sedan. Ryan and his wife Jessica in a new SUV I'd helped them buy last year. Aunt Karen and Uncle Jim, who had been suspiciously silent throughout this ordeal but had undoubtedly been cheering from the sidelines. The family legion assembled to collect their due. I took a deep breath, mentally rehearsing what I needed to say. This wasn't about anger or revenge, it was about setting boundaries that should have been established years ago. The doorbell rang. I opened the door to find them clustered on my porch, expressions ranging from grim determination to poorly concealed triumph. Dad was in his wheelchair, looking frilier than I remembered, a silent reminder of the emotional leverage they'd been using against me. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They filed into my living room, taking seats and casting judgmental glances at the surroundings they'd so recently used against me. I remained standing, a deliberate power move I'd learned from years of client presentations. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady. "I asked you here because what happened this week crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Breaking into my business accounts, publicly slandering me, threatening my reputation and livelihood, these aren't the actions of people who love me. These are the actions of extortionists." "Now, wait just a minute," Uncle Jim started, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. For years, I've supported this family financially. I've paid for treatments, mortgages, cars, tuition, all because I love you and wanted to help. But my success became a resource you felt entitled to, and when I finally said no, you tried to destroy everything I've built." "We were desperate, Olivia," Mom interjected, tears already forming. "Your father's appointment is already paid for," I said quietly. The room fell silent. "What?" Ryan asked, confusion replacing his smug expression. I turned to my father. "Dad, I called Dr. Ramirez's office yesterday. I settled the outstanding balance and paid for the next 3 treatments in advance." My father's eyes widened, a mixture of shame and relief washing over his face. "But I did it on one condition," I continued, turning back to address the whole room. "That all further communication about his care goes directly through me and his doctors, not through any of you." "You can't do that," Mom protested. "Actually, I can," I said. "I've been declared Dad's medical proxy. The paperwork was finalized this morning." "That's outrageous," Aunt Karen exclaimed. "Eleanor is his wife. A wife who has repeatedly misrepresented his medical needs to extort money," I replied calmly. "I have the records, Aunt Karen. Every emergency payment, every specialist appointment that never appeared on his actual medical records. Did you know only about 60% of the money I've given has actually gone to Dad's care? The rest has been distributed throughout the family for personal expenses." The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan's face had gone pale, and my mother wouldn't meet my eyes. "That's why this arrangement is changing, effective immediately," I continued. "I will continue to support Dad's medical care, but I will no longer be providing financial assistance to any other family member, for any reason." "You selfish bitch," Ryan spat, jumping to his feet. "After everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me, Ryan?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Besides trying to destroy my business when I refused to buy you a second new car this year?" He faltered, eyes darting around as if seeking support. "That's what I thought," I said. "Now, there's one more thing. I've filed a police report about the hacking incident, and I've been advised to seek a restraining order. I don't want to do that, you're still my family, despite everything. So I'm offering an alternative." I pulled out a stack of documents from the side table. "These are agreements stating that you will never again access my personal or business accounts without permission, that you will not make public statements about me or my business, and that you will respect my financial boundaries going forward. If you sign these, I won't pursue legal action." "This is ridiculous," Uncle Jim scoffed. "You're treating your own family like criminals." No, Uncle Jim. I'm treating people who committed criminal acts against me like criminals, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. The only reason you're not all facing charges right now is because, despite everything, I still care about you. My mother stood up, her face twisted with anger and hurt. We're your family, Olivia. This isn't how family treats each other. You're right, Mom. Family doesn't blackmail each other. Family doesn't try to destroy each other's livelihoods. Family doesn't exploit medical crises for financial gain. I set the agreements on the coffee table. Sign these, and we can start rebuilding. Refuse, and I'll have no choice but to protect myself through legal channels. One by one, they signed. Ryan last of all, his signature an angry scrawl across the page. The silence was heavy with resentment and shattered illusions, on both sides. As they prepared to leave, my father wheeled himself over to where I stood by the door. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a complicated mixture of emotions. I'm sorry, Liv, he said quietly. This got out of hand. I never wanted. I know, Dad, I said, squeezing his shoulder gently. We'll figure it out. Your appointment is on Monday at 10 a.m. I'll pick you up at 9:30. He nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his face before Mom wheeled him out, refusing to look at me as they passed. When the door closed behind the last of them, I sank onto the couch, emotional exhaustion washing over me. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Did they sign? Yes, I replied. All of them. Good. How are you holding up? I stared at the question for a long moment, trying to find the right words. I'm not sure yet. I've never stood up to them like this before. It feels necessary. And heartbreaking. Her response was immediate. It was necessary. And you did it with grace and strength. I'm proud of you, Liv. As I set my phone down, I gazed around my living room, the space that had just hosted the most difficult confrontation of my life. It looked exactly the same, yet everything had changed. I had changed. For so long, I'd equated love with financial support, believing that my worth to my family was measured by what I could provide. It had taken this spectacular implosion to make me realize that true love, from me to them, and from them to me, had to be built on something more substantial than transactions and obligations. I didn't know if we could ever rebuild what had been broken. The hurt ran deep on both sides, and trust, once shattered, is not easily restored. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing freely, standing firmly in my own truth. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I would no longer be defined by what my family demanded of me. I would be defined by the boundaries I set, the principles I upheld, and the life I chose to create. And that life began today. 2 months later, I sat in the waiting room of Dr. Ramirez's office, flipping through a magazine without really seeing the pages. The door to the examination room opened, and my father emerged, followed by the doctor. Everything's looking good, William, Dr. Ramirez said, shaking my father's hand. The treatment is working exactly as we'd hoped. I'll see you again in 3 weeks. Relief washed over me as I stood to greet them. That's great news. Dad nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face. Thanks to you, Liv. Our relationship had settled into a new pattern over the past weeks, one built on direct communication rather than filtered through the family's collective narrative. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest in a way we hadn't been for years. As we drove home, Dad stared out the window, his expression thoughtful. Your mother's having a hard time, he said finally. With all of this. The new arrangement. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. I know. It's a big adjustment for everyone. She misses you, he continued. We all do. Sunday dinners aren't the same without you. I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. I'm not ready for that yet, Dad. The trust needs to be rebuilt first. He sighed, but nodded in understanding. For what it's worth, Ryan's been different since it all happened. Quieter. More thoughtful. I think he's doing some soul-searching. I hope so, I said, genuinely meaning it. Despite everything, I missed my little brother, the real Ryan, not the entitled man he'd become. When we arrived at my parents' house, Mom was waiting on the porch. Her expression was guarded but not hostile, progress, of a sort. How did it go? She asked as I helped Dad up the ramp. Good news, Dad answered. The doctor says the treatment is working. A flash of genuine relief crossed her face, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the mother I remembered from childhood, the one who had taught me to stand up for myself, ironically enough. That's wonderful, she said, then hesitated, glancing at me. Would you like to stay for lunch, Olivia? It's nothing fancy, just sandwiches, but... It was an olive branch, small but significant. Not a full reconciliation, but a step towards something new. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. As we sat around the kitchen table, the conversation was stilted at first, carefully avoiding sensitive topics. But gradually, some of the tension eased. We talked about Dad's treatment, about the unusually warm weather, about a movie Dad had watched recently. Normal family conversation. No accusations, no guilt trips, no undercurrents of financial expectation. When it was time for me to leave, Mom walked me to the door. The Henderson contract, she said suddenly. Were you able to salvage it? The question caught me off guard. It was the first acknowledgement from any of them about the professional damage they'd caused. Yes, actually, I said. Zoe and I met with them last week. We explained the situation, not all the details, but enough. They're giving us another chance. Mom nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor. I'm glad. That's good. It wasn't an apology, we weren't there yet, but it was recognition, and for now, that was enough. As I drove home, I reflected on how fundamentally my life had changed in just a few months. I had lost the unconditional support of my family but gained something perhaps more valuable, self-respect, clear boundaries, and a new understanding of what healthy relationships should look like. The road ahead would be long and undoubtedly filled with setbacks. Trust, once broken, takes time and consistent effort to rebuild. But for the first time, I felt hopeful that we might eventually find our way to a new kind of family dynamic, one built on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Henderson contract is officially signed. We did it, partner. Celebration dinner tonight? I smiled, typing back a quick affirmative response. This was what success should feel like, clean, earned, and unburdened by manipulation or guilt. This was the life I had worked for, the future I had envisioned when I started Reed Design Group. And while the cost had been higher than I could have imagined, I finally understood that some prices are worth paying, not in dollars, but in the currency of self-worth, boundaries, and authentic relationships. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt lighter than I had in years. No longer waiting for the next crisis, the next demand, the next emotional manipulation. Just me, my choices, and the freedom to define success on my own terms. It turns out, that was all I'd ever wanted.